the inspiration for a video game character can come from anywhere. I mean, you got your obvious countless Hulk Hogan and Bruce Lee afflatuses in games, co-workers like Mario and Nintendo's warehouse manager Mario Segale, to celebrities like Sonic and Michael Jackson. Yeah, I don't see it either. But every now and then, you sometimes get the total opposite. Created and named just to troll, to annoy, to irritate, all in the sake of disgruntlement, pettiness, or just plain retribution. So, this episode, we take a look at these insulting inceptions, these cruel concepts, and these aggravated appreciations, as I say. But, hello you, I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt. 5 video game characters solely created to piss someone off. One of the genius moves Sega of America did to push the release of the Genesis in the US was to tie in several sports stars with their launch titles. You had the likes of your Pat Riley for basketball, Joe Montana for football, Arnold Palmer for golf, and of course, a melting Bill Clinton for baseball. However, one curious choice was Sega sponsoring James Buster Douglas for their boxing title. Now, the game itself was done on the cheap, simply being a rebranded port of the 2-year-old Japanese arcade game Final Blow, which in all honesty was a terrible game. Even Douglas himself was getting past his prime, one match away from retiring to be exact. But the man did have one thing going for him. He was the first boxer to have ever defeated Mike Tyson. And as any gamer worth their salt will tell you, Mike Tyson was Nintendo's main sporting star for their boxing game, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Yup, the main reason Sega hired James Buster Douglas to sponsor their new boxing game was entirely to shove in the faces of the big N that Sega's guy had just whooped Nintendo's guy. Sega weren't even hiding the fact they did this, proudly displaying Douglas's victory over Tyson on the back of the game's box. I mean, yeah, Sega didn't create James Buster Douglas. That would have been Mr. and Mrs. Douglas one cold autumn evening in 1959. But to hire a guy solely to get one over the main prize fighting star of your main competitor's boxing game, well, that does come across as a little petty. In fact, by the time the game was released in Europe, Douglas has lost the belt to Evander Holyfield and retired, who Sega conveniently hired for their next licensed boxing game, which was also a bit crap. In October 2010, Team Meat commercially released the hard-as-nails old-school-inspired platformer, Super Meat Boy. You guide your skinless friend around increasingly tricky levels, leaving trails of blood wherever he goes. Although the game has been available as a free Flash game since 2008, it was the 2010 Xbox 360 release that sent Meat Boy's popularity skyrocketing. Only 2 months later, on December the 1st, the well-known animal euthanizing group PETA took a break from threatening scientists and instead released a parody Flash game called Super Tofu Boy. Now, this wasn't the first time PETA has attacked video games to promote its hypocritical group. They had previously taken a shot at Cooking Mama and Mario's Tanuki suit. But PETA's take on gaming's favourite flayed fellow, Super Tofu Boy, had you controlling a piece of tofu rather than a slab of meat, and the basic game was the same. However, the control mechanics were so poorly crafted, you'd have to play on a Soldier Boy console to find a worse experience. However, these crappy controls were an inspiration for Team Meat, as the very next day an update was pushed to the PC version of Super Meat Boy that now featured Tofu Boy as a playable character. Tofu Boy had far worse jumping and running capabilities than Meat Boy, and just in case you weren't totally convinced that it was a dig at Peter, the way to unlock Tofu Boy was to go to the character select screen and type Peter file. Peter still went on to infringe copyright in other games series in the future, but in this case, at least they found out that you can't beat the meat. Haha! I'll give it a go. Some people call this a roguelike game because of all the dungeons. Others call it a twin-stick shooter because of the controls. I'll let you all battle that one out in the comments. But either way, this is The Binding of Isaac, an indie game from 2011 which sees you blasting monsters as you traverse various dungeons. Now, there are actually a few little references to find in this title. One section which is clearly a nod to Hudson Soft's Bomberman. And this? Well, this could be anything, really. But there is one reference in this game that was created just to annoy everyone's favourite developer, Phil Fish. Of the numerous different selectable characters on offer here, one is called Judas, which on the face is quite fitting anyway, given the obvious parallels between this game's story and the biblical story of the same name. However, the Judas in this game wears a fez on his head, just like the main character in Phil's game, Fez. Now, why would the studio want to associate Phil with the quintessential icon of betrayal? Well, this stems back to an incident that happened at the Independent Games Festival one year. While in development, The Binding of Isaac was nominated to win the festival's grand prize that year, a prize Phil had won in a previous year while Fez was in development. When it came round to the point for voting to see if The Binding of Isaac should win this year, Phil voted against it, and thus the character Judas was born. Why was this competition so important though? Well, it came with a fairly substantial cash prize. Now, there is a whole scandal surrounding this games festival too, but that's a whole kettle of Phil Fish best left for another day. After the phenomenal success of Street Fighter 2, everyone and their mother wanted a slice of that delicious one-on-one pie. I mean, you had your likes of your Street Fighters with ninjas in Mortal Kombat, your Street Fighters with dinosaurs in Primal Rage, and your Street Fighters with waifus in Street Fighter 2. However, despite taking Data East to court over their unabashed plagiarism with Fighter's history, one game that got particularly close to Capcom's bone was SNK's Art of Fighting. You see, one of the two main protagonists of Art of Fighting is Ryo Sasaki, who, despite already having a similar name to Ryu, also sports a very similar pair of karate gym jams, complete with torn sleeves, just in orange this time. However, rather than seek litigation for this conspicuous course of copying, possibly as Capcom lost big time in their lawsuit to Data East last time, they decided to mock SNK this time around by creating the joke fighting character Dan Hibiki. For starters, Dan's physical appearance is literally Ryo Sasaki's body in a pink gi, and the head of Art of Fighting's other playable character, Robert Garcia. They nerfed Dan's fireball to the point of it being practically useless, then made it where he was the only fighter in the game that could taunt more than once per round, just like players could in Art of Fighting. And even when SNK's King of Fighters series was being continuously dominated by Street Fighter's success, Capcom still never let up. For example, in Street Fighter Alpha 2, Ken would ask Dan if he knew the Art of Fighting. In Alpha 3, Dan says that he hates the art of fighting, but wants to be the king of the fighters. He's also referred to as a total loser in the same game. In all fairness, Art of Fighting's creator, Takashi Nishiyama, openly admitted that Ryo was created as a homage to Ryu. In fact, Nishiyama not only worked for Capcom previously, he had actually created the first Street Fighter and developed the concept of Ryu's fireballs. So, is Ryu really a rip-off of Ryu, or just the creator retreading their own material? But it does make one ponder, is this more a case of Capcom being salty at Nishiyama for leaving them, joining their main competitor, then creating their main guy again for their rival? We may never know. But there is a happy end here. Capcom and SNK put aside their differences and came together to create the frankly brilliant Capcom vs SNK series. Although a year later SNK went bankrupt, so maybe it's not actually a happy ending after all. Despite going into great depth in my Drivergate scandal video a few years ago, one thing I didn't really touch upon was Driver's developer Reflection's rather open rivalry with Grand Theft Auto's developer DMA Design, or Rockstar North as they're known today, openly taking jabs at each other over several games. One of which is this segment's created character. The year 2000 gave us Reflection's Driver 2 and its main protagonist, undercover cop John Tanner. Only 1 year later, Rockstar delivered Grand Theft Auto 3, which featured the mission Two-Faced Tanner. Yeah, you can tell where she's going already. You're tasked with taking out an undercover cop, only known as Tanner, who has been tailing the Yakuza. Now, if Tanner manages to escape from your pursuit on foot, you'll not only notice he's wearing very similar clothing to what he has in Driver 2, but he also sports his rather bizarre walking pattern too. Rockstar just changed his walking cycle to that of a female NPC in the game. And if that wasn't bad enough, with GTA 3's sequel, GTA Vice City, in the payphone mission Autoside, you're once again instructed to assassinate another Tanner, this time a security guard by the name of Dick Tanner. Rockstar North also used this same mission to mock other sandbox titles that have sprung up after the success of GTA 3, as you also have to off Marcus Hammond, aka Mark Hammond, Franco Carter, aka Frank Carter, and Charlie Dilson, aka Charlie Jolson, from Sony's The Getaway, as well as Nick Kong, aka Nicholas Kong, from Activision's true crime Streets of LA. Reflections didn't take this lying down, however. Oh no siree. And in their next game, which was a horribly botched Driver 3, they also included an NPC to mock GTA Vice City. The character in question was Timmy Vermicelli, and he looks almost identical to Vice City's protagonist, Tommy Vercetti, in every way, complete with oversized hands, which was a bizarre feature in GTA's character designs. Reflections even put Timmy in water wings, mocking the fact Rockstar couldn't implement swimming in their franchise. Well, not until San Andreas, anyway. In Reflections' defense, when you do come across one of the 10 Timmy Vermicellis hidden in the Miami area, he's a right tough bugger to take down, and will collectively hand your arse to you if you run at him with guns a-blazing. Thankfully, early 2000s AI is pretty dumb, so the simple tactic of standing slightly behind a wall to take shots at him will be enough for silly Timmy to completely ignore your presence and will be eliminated pretty easily. Unless that is what Reflections was going for. But as you can see in my Drivergate video, the game is so terribly programmed thanks to its infamous rushed development. The truth could be either way.
Viewers also might like to know there's a Fact Hunt book to accompany the series.
Hello you! Thanks ever so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to be first to see future Fact Hunt episodes. Click on the bell if you already are to make sure you're notified, and be sure to check out my other episodes. And if you want to be super awesome, check out my Patreon. But thanks again for watching, and I'll be seeing you next time. Ta-ra for now.